Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Wow Ergonomics. It's Friday, it's midday, which is the best day of the week for a lot of you. It's been a cold one this week. I'm feeling the cold already. What about you, Slim?
Definitely ice on cars. I was out there scraping the cars most days this week, and I was talking to someone, a colleague up in Yorkshire, and she's got a load of snow. So it's on its way, I think. It's on its way.
We've had a few flakes here today down in Somerset. So talking about the cold weather, our guest today, who's about to come in, the wonderful Rachael, has been or is about to be busy this afternoon, she tells me, putting fleeces on trees. So we've got to find out about that. So let's introduce her. Hi, Rachael.
Hi, and Harley's decided to join in as well. So,
there you go.
Excellent.
Do introduce yourself to the masses. Say who you are and what it is that you do.
Hi, I'm Rachael. I'm a coach, mindset coach, and executive leadership coach. I've worked in healthcare for many years. If I tell you how many, you'll give away my age, but over 25. So, 20 of those I've been on leadership boards, like national leadership boards. So my passion for coaching really is I've done all sorts through my career, so teaching and stuff, but coaching is more about helping people find their own magic, whereas teaching is like dictating a syllabus, and people have got to pass. So yeah, that's what kind of made me go off into coaching on my own, rather than, obviously I worked in the NHS for years and I've been free for 5. I say free because it is like a life sentence. It's like for years I didn't see daylight. Like the hospital pharmacy and they always seem to be underground. So like you can work all day, and like if you go in at 7 in the morning, come out at 7 at night, you don't know what weather is at all or what season it is. So yeah, when I was liberated, it was quite an experience to see that we have seasons in the UK.
Yeah, I expect it was. You were saying just before we came on that you've got palm trees. Is that right? And you need to protect them.
Yeah, so I live on the coast, and I wanted to create like a tropical garden. Like there's a whole thing about tropical gardens in the UK and like getting the right plants. So I've got some palms that I've been sort of about 3 years now. Since lockdown, I really started doing my garden, probably like everyone. But yeah, I've got some that they can live to -5 degrees, but it's better to cover them up. So we've got snow forecast apparently.
Yeah.
To protect my babies. One of them was about £250 when I bought it. And in the garden centre now, I think it probably cost you well over £500 to buy it. So you can imagine like having a few of those, and then if you lost them. Last year, lots of people lost their whole gardens because it was so cold, wasn't it, compared to normal?
Absolutely. I must admit, when we first bought this house here, there was a palm tree in the garden. There's no longer a palm tree in the garden, and we had a very cold year one year with snow, and it completely killed it. That was it, just completely. They just rot.
Yeah, they're really. So these fleece things, they're like got special material. They're not fleecy like a fleece jumper. They've got like they're white material, but they've got like tiny holes to let the light in. But I have been told, yeah, and this is the thing, if it's like snowy for 3 days and it stops, I've got to climb back up the ladder, pull them off, because like you said, if they get frozen underneath and then defrost, then it rots the center. So it's kind of like it's like having children, but obviously they don't talk back to you. But you got to look after them.
Fantastic. In terms of your experience in the healthcare sector, one of the things we talk a lot about on this program, and perhaps you can maybe give us kind of your experience of this, and then maybe where it fits in with your coaching now. We've seen a lot of people working in silos in the kind of healthcare sector, and like a sort of a lack of a joined up approach. Did you kind of see that without
Yeah, well, I don't work for them anymore, so I can give my honest
say what you
views.
like.
Yeah. No, it's the whole thing's fragmented. So like even you know, like communication within hospital, and then primary care, which is your GPs and your like little cottage hospitals and things like that. The communication between them is awful. And then you've got like community pharmacy as well. And probably about 10 years ago now, I started working on a project called the Summary Care Record, which I don't know if you know about, but patients' records where you could be able to access it, but the community pharmacist should be able to as well. And I mean, all of these things taken so long to implement, but they actually don't they still, like, pharmacists have to get permission. Yet the person who's giving you your medicines, wouldn't you rather that they knew your whole history? So I think it shows you like drugs, last prescribed drugs, your allergies, and a few other things, but it doesn't give you access to everything. Whereas wouldn't you rather, as the patient, think the pharmacist could check your last blood results or your last scan to see if the drugs you're taking are the right drugs for you? Because ultimately pharmacists are expert in medicines. They did like 5-6 years, whereas a doctor in a medical degree, I think it's like 3 months that they spend on actually learning about medicines directly. So, well, doctors are the ones you want to prescribe you the medicines. Pharmacists are the ones you want to be giving you the advice on how to take them safely. But the other sort of biggest example is that social care and healthcare funding are separate. That's a huge, huge thing. So, like, if you've got, like where I live, a high demographic of elderly patients, and they're in hospital, you know, it's cold, icy, fallen over, broken your hip, you're actually back up on your feet within a few days, and you need rehab, but there aren't any little rehab hospitals anymore. So then you end up being in hospital for months and months. And one of the blocks is that there's no nursing home places for people, or social services don't want to pay for them, or there aren't enough carers. So those people could all go home, but they can't. And then they end up in hospital and they lose that independence that they had. Because all of a sudden, you know, if you're like my 80-year-old uncle, used to do everything for himself, you know, shopping, cooking after my auntie died, still rode his bike, still potted around in his shed. And then you imagine going into hospital for 3 months and you're not even allowed to make your own breakfast. You know, you might be allowed to make a cup of tea if you're lucky in the day room, but everything's taken away from you. So then when you go home, it's like, how do you look after yourself after some sort of long-term illness or life-changing event? Yeah, you wouldn't want to be like rehabilitated in hospital if you could be rehabilitated at home. And actually, it's better for you to have, say, like occupational therapists that come into your home and say, right, does your sofa need to be raised so you can sit on it? You know, do we need to give you some adaptation so you can cook for yourself, for example? Instead of taking away everyone's independence totally, then they end up needing carers coming in 3 or 4 times a day.
Because we often hear, though, Rachel, isn't it, though, is that, you know, I mean, is it down to money simply? Is it down to organisation? You often hear comments, is it a lack of people with commercial experience in the NHS around how to procure? Is it a combination of all those different factors? Because it can't sit, you know, yes, it's got to be down to money and funding, but if it's not organised and there aren't the right level of commercial people in there, that surely has an impact. Is the money being spent unwisely, incorrectly? Does that factor into all of the issues that there are?
I mean, it can do, because individual hospitals can choose how they spend their budgets to a certain extent. Like, you can look at which services you provide. So here where I live, it's a district hospital, so we've got to provide pretty much all the services. Whereas if you're in a city, so like when I worked in Bournemouth, for example, you've got quite a few hospitals around you. So it makes sense for some to be specialist centres for one disease and some to focus on other things. So like you'd have a cancer centre and a neurosurgery, for example. They wouldn't all be in the same place necessarily, because they're all high cost services. And so the way with the funding and things, but NHS procurement is like it's almost like a separate, the supply chain and the procurement in the NHS is really actually quite good, and like the negotiations for prices and things like that. But then when you think we came out of Europe, we have got companies in the UK that make like generic drugs and things, but we do now have to outsource things from abroad. But if you think there's so many things in the NHS that you have to procure, it's like shopping for your household, but for a whole hospital. So, you know, like even things like tea, coffee, the food that you give the patients, the food that you give the staff, what cleaning products you use, like there's just so many things that you've got to procure. So like it's a whole service in itself. Just as I was leaving, so about 5 years ago, they were looking at, quite a few of the hospitals are like looking at making hubs together. So if you're say like in the Southwest, I am using that collaborative approach to have better buying power and almost hiring a warehouse. So you could buy, 100,000 cleaning cloths and keep them in the warehouse and then share the cost, rather than buying like 10 packets each as it when you need them, if that makes sense.
Like
so
a consortium.
So the people, there are really innovative approaches to saving as much money as possible, and people want to try and put it into patient care. But then there's so many times, like when I was leading a department, like where one day you're told you've got to save 30% of your staffing budget this year, and you have to figure out how that's going to happen. And I'm working with a lady now who's in that same situation. And then by the next week, it'll be there's a pot of government funding for emergency winter pressures, for example, and you have to bid and get funding to employ some more staff. And so one hand, they're telling you you've got to spend ages trying to think how you're going to cut staff, how you're going to get rid of them, but still deliver the same service. And then on the other hand, there's suddenly pots of money appear, but they're always for limited times. But you can imagine the morale of staff if you've only employ people on fixed short-term contracts, because you've got no security, have you? And like, again, if it's somewhere rural and high cost where I live, who wants to relocate the whole family, the whole house for a 12-month contract? So the way they've approached it down in the Southwest is that the big teaching hospitals and the smaller hospitals have joined together, and the doctors have to rotate through all of them. So it's not an option. But, like people would come here, be a doctor, work here till they retire. That's it. No fresh blood. Sort of one in, one out, literally. And I remember like where I started in the pharmacy here, it was like there wasn't ever any scope for promotion until somebody literally retired or died, because people worked in that job for life. And obviously in like London, for example, you want to keep learning new things as a pharmacist, doctor, nurse. You want to explore the different specialties to find the one that you're really good at and the one that you enjoy. So having all the hospitals there within sort of walking distance of each other, literally, means you can sort of hop from one to the next. And also, we don't have a job for life anymore, do we? That's kind of pretty old school, that you leave school, you go to college, go to uni, get a job, and you stay there till you retire. That's kind of, it's not really the thing now, is it?
No, that's definitely changed. Do we see the same issue in the sector of sort of ergonomics as well, Stephen, to some extent? I mean, that it's sort of a chase for figures as opposed to proper allocation of funds in the right places, and that leads to sort of a race to the bottom in terms of provision.
Yeah, I think so. And it's interesting what Rachael was saying there, because I'm thinking of my experience of going into NHS locations with some of our reseller partners. So I will get asked occasionally, Rachael, as we're a manufacturer, can I go into some hospitals and demonstrate some of our products that could potentially help? And what was really interesting is when I went in there, is a number of them said their biggest challenge was actually sickness. So their focus was actually, for the people we met, was actually they didn't want to necessarily buy, and this is really good actually, they didn't necessarily want to buy the lowest cost product. What they wanted to get the product to the user that would help alleviate the issues and the sickness, and they felt their biggest challenge was actually sickness. So it's an interesting one, and I look at this as a manufacturer of product that is sort of medium to top end in terms of where we are functionality and price-wise, we don't produce the lowest cost product out there. But what was really interesting was there's a lot of interest in our product in the NHS because they felt if they could tackle sickness, then actually investing in the right kit was more important than necessarily what Graham said, racing it to the bottom and buying the cheapest product. They needed the product that was going to get people back into work and really alleviating and addressing the sort of the sickness that they were experiencing across their departments.
Yeah, so in terms of staffing in the NHS, sickness absence and turnaround are the biggest costs because obviously recruitment costs a lot of money. Probably aware of that yourselves, like if someone leaves and sort of backfill and all the bump that goes with it. And then, sickness and nursing, for example. I think one of the biggest sickness causes in nurses is back injuries because lifting patients, etc. So, and then that equally applies to people who are office based in the NHS. If you've got a crap £20 chair and you're sat on it 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, or 60 hours a week, and your position's not right. So actually, like risk assessments in terms of ergonomics, like you said, are computers at the right height. Having standing computers for people, having different options for different people, because again, you've got people at all different stages of their life working in your department. So you might have some sprightly 20-year-olds, and then you've got some people getting on a bit like me with the bones of a 90-year-old who kind of need different things. So having all your computers sit down stations, for example, even in pharmacy, like typing labels, some people want to sit down and type. Other people want to stand up and, get some exercise type thing. So, all of that's really important. And for patients as well, like, your beds and things like that. You can't have a bed if you're going to get pressure sores. You need to have beds that can be lifted up and down. You need to have lifting equipment. It's literally so, and all of those come under procurement, don't they? Because like you said, if you think about it the same way we think about clothes, it's cost per wear, isn't it? So the cheapest thing might not be the most beneficial to you. Actually, sometimes buying something that's made better and is going to last longer is actually kind of the best investment. And when you've limited money, you want to make sure you invest the best way possible, because it's, that's the other thing you're saying about budgets. All the budgets are separate. So you'll have a staffing budget, you'll have a budget for stationery, for example. And so they're all kind of separated out. It's not like you get one big budget for your department and you can save a bit on, I don't know, we're not going to buy anyone pens this year. They can all buy their own, or we'll get them from drug reps. And then we'll put that money back into something else. It's like, this is your allocation for stationery. This is your allocation for staffing. This is your allocation for estates. So when I say estates, it could be like decoration and all of the things.
It must actually be, to be fair, it must, being anyone that has to do procurement in the National Health Service, must be an absolute minefield, because just where do you allocate that money? I mean, you just have to try and look in such a broad picture, don't you, all of the time, to see where that really is going to have a major impact.
You have to bid for money quite often. So it will be like the government will say, there's a pot of money, and all the you then have to put a case together. So like why you should be the person to get a share of that money. And then you'll get, so an example, when it was like winter bed pressures, happens every year everywhere. But so all of a sudden, instead of waiting in the summer thinking, right, we know in 3 months we're going to be short of beds, they wait until Christmas, and it'll be like Christmas Eve. If you put a case in now, you might get some money for an extra staff. Lack of forethought.
It kind of takes me back to, and this is a problem that's been around for years, of course, because it kind of takes me back to when I was a boy, listening to not the
long time ago.
News. Yeah, a long time ago, because I really am that old. Listening to not the 9 o'clock news, and there was a sketch. Do you remember they did a sketch where everyone was bidding for a hospital bed? If you don't remember that, folks, you can look it up on the internet. It's still there on the internet. I won't go into the ins and outs of it because it's probably a bit politically incorrect. But it kind of made the point.
Is it down to money, Rachel? If there was if suddenly the Chancellor suddenly had a blank checkbook, could we buy our way out of these problems? Or even if there was the money, are there still fundamental issues under that around the size of the organization and the way it's organized? Would a blank checkbook still not fully resolve everything, in your opinion?
I think you need the innovative leadership to say we can't just do things the same way we've always done them. So like, does all care really need to be given in hospital? How much care could be given in a different setting? Whether that setting is, for example, say like there aren't enough nursing home beds, like could a hospital hire a hotel? Like I live in a seaside area. So like could the hospital hire a hotel for the winter? You know, you've got winter pressures, hire a hotel, have 10 nurses there, for example, and those people who are not ill enough to be in hospital, but not well enough to be home alone, they could be cared for there rather than an acute setting, you know, like what different things could we do? But you need people with the sort of foresight to think we're doing the same thing, we're battling the same thing every year. And unless we change something, nothing is going to change. And for example, it's much safer to give chemo to patients at home. But that means that you need more chemo nurses, you know, because if you've got 10 patients having chemo on a ward, you can have a couple of nurses there going up and down, making sure everyone's all right, not having a reaction. But if you're going to go and give it to someone in their home, that means you're going to go and you need that nurse to sit with them for the day, for example, if it's their first dose. So, yeah, but then you sort of weigh up the cost of how much is a hospital bed day per day. So, I mean, I'm going back to the figures when I was there, so a few years ago now, but like a normal hospital bed would be like £400 a night. And that's just the cost of a bed stay. And then an ITU bed would be like a lot more. So when you think about it that way, then that sort of accounts for nursing. That doesn't account for the drug cost or all of the other stuff that goes with it. That's just sort of basic cost per patient per night. And if you look at that in terms of A&E as well, you know, since COVID, GPs have been more and more inaccessible. That means more people go to A&E than need to, because they could have in the old days. That makes me sound really old.
Yeah. I'm going to say,
days, you went to the GP, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, look, I want to talk about how this has an impact upon everything that's done within the kind of health and wellness sector, because, and you know, I wonder whether companies are going to need to start taking up more of the auspice for or ownership of their employees' well-being, because can the state provision actually deal with it long term? You know, I mean, I just wonder whether we aren't on, without, you know, sounding a bit dramatic, but I do wonder whether we are on the sort of verge of another sort of pandemic, if you like, not caused this time by a virus, but caused by a sort of lack of infrastructure or lack of money. Because I know for a fact from, you know, the dental profession, for example, they're struggling. You know, a lot of the dentists out there or dental practices out there, they're struggling to get dentists through at the moment. You can't find a qualified dentist for love nor money. You've got nurses on a minimum wage, which means that a lot of them are deciding to go elsewhere and not come into the profession. I know from conversations that I've had with pharmacists, for example, that, and seen the figures lately, a lot of the national pharmacists, the sort of chains, they've rapidly closed stores all over the country. I know that, as you said, I mean, I can see from the effects myself in terms of trying to get a hold of medication for both myself and for my youngest, who has regular medication. you know, it's a struggle now to get hold of some medication, and you have to search around to try and find it. Where we are in Chard, we've had a couple of doctor surgeries close, even though as a town it's getting bigger and bigger. I just wonder whether we're, as I say, on the verge of a sort of medical problem here. And
I think, well, definitely. And I think the thing is, if like the NHS staff survey, 80% of staff, and that was the year before, because obviously the results come out kind of a year after, but 80% of staff were burnt out, stressed, had compassion fatigue through working through COVID, you know, seeing more deaths in a short space of time than most people caring for people would see in a lifetime. You know, that has an impact on you, doesn't it? It's, yeah, it's sort of like post-traumatic stress effects that people are going to suffer for a long time. And like you said, the pay doesn't reflect the work. And it's not so much that people go into healthcare for pay, because most people go into healthcare because they care. But if you're working 50, 60 hours a week and you've still got to get food from the food bank, and that's a reality, you know, there's a food bank in our hospital for nurses. So, you know, how is that possibly right? And it's definitely not going to make it an attractive career, is it? Because you need to be able to live, you know, as much as you want to care for other people, you've still got to be able to have a basic cost of living and standard of living. And this isn't like people saying, I want to go on holiday 3 times a year. This is people like working 60 hours a week who still can't afford to buy school uniforms or the Christmas presents.
No, exactly. Stephen, do you feel this is going to impact, you know, the health and well-being sector that you know you're involved in as well? I mean, in terms of, surely it means that employers are going to have to think more about their well-being schemes, their employee assistance programs, in terms of ensuring that, you know, people have access to healthcare schemes or private healthcare schemes, etc. Because ultimately, you know, if you're losing your workforce or part of your workforce on a regular basis due to ill health, and there's not the provision there nationally, or there's holes in that system, and you don't make up the shortfall, you're gonna lose that. You're going to be paying for that talent to be at home or ill or whatever. And also, doesn't that become more and more of an attractive proposition for proper talent? I'm going to go and work for someone that's going to take care of my health and well-being.
Yeah. I should just say, sorry, apologies. I'm having problems with my camera, hence why if you are watching it live and you're not listening through Spotify, then that's why the camera's off, because it's really frustrating that I'm 5 or 6 seconds behind. So apologies about that. I think that the thing that sticks in my mind, Graham, and we've referenced this a number of times on this show, there are still organizations out there, large organizations, when it comes to health and well-being, and we can get specifically into the products that we do if we want to, who don't look after their computer users, which, you know, Rachael referenced before about people with £20 chairs and things like that. And actually, Rachael and I hadn't had a conversation earlier, but that sort of teed it up quite nicely. I think the problem is there are still organizations out there, I don't think who take the health and well-being of their computer users seriously. You know, we can get back specifically to product that we do. You know, I don't necessarily want to do that. But as an example, there are still lots of people out there not allocated the right type of equipment, be it a good chair, be it a good desk, be it this, that, and the other that plugs into their laptop. And I think that's where organizations need to get a little bit more serious about this, because I think a lot of them still think of it as an unnecessary investment. Why am I going to go and do that? Just crack on with what you've got. And I think whilst companies still do that, you are going to get this sort of pandemic type thing that you referenced there, Graham, that you are going to suddenly start getting in it big issues where people for long periods of time will be unable to come into work because of chronic back, and neck issues and things like that. And I think until organisations, predominantly in the commercial world, take it seriously and don't see that investment as just a capex expense, but actually an investment in the health and well-being of their staff, this is still going to be something that we're going to keep coming back round to.
Yeah. I want to pick up with Rachael. I mean, you've obviously moved into coaching and coaching sort of leaders. Is this to some extent one of the reasons why you moved into coaching? Because actually now more than ever, we need really good leaders in business.
Yeah, and we need to support leaders to feel confident that they can make sometimes radical decisions, disruptive decisions. And I don't mean disruptive being awkward for the sake of it. I mean disrupting what we've always done. If we do, I keep saying, if we do what we've always done, we're going to keep getting the same outcome. And we can, we all see that year after year. There aren't enough beds, there isn't enough money, we can't access drugs, staff. So like one of the things Stephen was saying about back injuries is once a nurse has had a back injury, they're really unlikely to ever fully recover. They're always going to have a weakness. So that person, their duties are going to be affected for the rest of their career. So if you're an early years career nurse, lifting a bariatric patient or something, you haven't got the right equipment, you have a serious back injury, that's always going to keep coming back to haunt you throughout your career, isn't it? You're always going to have that weak spot where you go to lean forward, do something, your back goes. So throughout your career, you're going to have multiple sickness absences from that one initial injury because you've got that weak spot. And there isn't, I think you really touched on, it's always a focus on sickness and absence, but there isn't any focus on preventing that happening in the first place. And I think, more, I keep saying about COVID, but more since the pandemic than ever, we need to look after the people who are looking after us is mental welfare, and emotional welfare. Who do they go to get over all of these things that they've seen that they shouldn't have seen, that, we were exposed to on a much, imagine how horrific all of it was for us, but being on the front line and again, not having the right equipment, so all of those things, not having access to all of those things and breaks, and having, like you're saying about computer stations, that should be really individualized, shouldn't it? Like you can't have, and this is the thing with hot desks, isn't it? They're not really set up for individuals to be ergonomically working at a safe sort of place for them. If you've got a hot desk, and that's one of the ways the NHS saved money, was like getting rid of, for example, in leadership and management, instead of them all having their own offices, they got these like big offices, you can work from home 2 days a week, then you've got to share this desk. So your computer isn't going to be set at the right height for you, is it? Your chair isn't going to be the right chair for you.
Well, I just want to ask you that. I mean, from your experience, because, it's one of those things where I think even within the industry, Stephen, I think, and this is fair to say, we kind of look at it and say, well, it's fine if somebody has a hot desk, because as long as they've got the education piece around adjusting it all prior to them using it, it can work. But the reality is, I think, how many people have actually got the time when they're really up against it and busy to make those kind of adjustments? I'm sure the answer is yes, but again, and I'm very keen on this whole time argument. Yeah, because I just think, again, unless organisations understand people's time and allocate time for those adjustments, people just get on, And
the reality is, like, so say for example, I would go in on a Monday morning, 8 o'clock, or go in a bit earlier. So straight away the phone would be ringing with people ringing in sick. That's the first thing. Also, nurses and wards would be ringing with, we tried to get this drug at the weekend, we couldn't get it, it's urgent. So your first 2 hours, maybe 3 hours would be phone calls sorting out urgent queries. So
you've got no time to
You might not have
make
even put your
adjustments.
bag down or made a coffee. You know, you'd be straight away on the phone before you've even started your day. Then you would be going to meetings about bed crisis, example. You know, these patients, we need to get out. This, we can't get this drug. We need this. You know, and that was the same for heads of all departments. You know, we'd have regular meetings to look at so turnaround times for hospitals are where the biggest pressure are. You know, the waiting times in A&E, so getting patients out of A&E into a ward or getting them home, and that's just constant grind. You know, so yeah, most, unless you're very lucky and you've got a remote office, you know, nobody knows the telephone number for or knows where your door is. As soon as you get in as a manager, leader, you've got people that want your attention. So yeah, you haven't got time to sit and play with your computer and just adjust the screen height and pump your chair up and down. And like we said, if you haven't even got a decent chair that you can adjust the backrest and stuff, you know, one of the things we did was we put names on the chairs, so people of a similar height and size kind of go, right, that chair I know will work for me. You know, kind of, because like obviously, so like, one of the other managers I worked with, she was like 6 foot tall and I'm 5'4", so like her chair would be different to mine, you know, obviously. So yeah, you know, it sounds crazy, but labeling those chairs on the back, at least you go, oh, that's Karen's chair, she's the same height as me, I'm gonna grab that one.
But do you know what I love about this conversation today is this is real from the coalface. And I just think I hope that like several people from the sector actually listen to this conversation as it goes out and perhaps comment on it. And I think it'd be interesting for you to hear some of the feedback, Rachel, as well, because I think it's very, very easy to kind of look at what's going on and have solutions, but in a very idealistic bubble. When, as you say, the reality is that, you know, especially when you're involved in an organization that is literally rushed off its backside, and where people are up against it, and actually there's a lack of bodies and there's a, you know, there's a lack of time, etc. That a lot of the idealism disappears, right? And actually that's part and parcel of the challenge, I guess, to the ergonomic community as well, is actually finding ways of actually stepping into that situation and helping in that situation in realistic ways. And being as kind of innovative as possible to enable the people that are on the ground to be able to make their life better in any shape or form, but with the chaos going on. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Think about the other side, which is the patient perspective. So you've got to have these waiting room chairs that are cleanable. You know, you've got to be able to alcohol gel them down and stuff. But, you know, if your 90-year-old nan is sat in A&E in a chair for 10 hours, 12 hours, and it's one of those chairs, you know, like it's like a bus stop chair, wouldn't you rather that they could be sat comfortably, you know, while they're waiting in pain, rather than just perched on a really plastic, horrible chair? You know, it goes so much broader, doesn't it? You know, when I first started, we had the nice fabric. I say nice, you know, but I mean, they were like, they had a little bit of cushioning and fabric, and then obviously, as you know, viruses and bugs have evolved, we had to have vinyl, and it had to be able to be cleaned and high temperature, etc. So that takes away some of the comfort. But you know, you must have been to a hospital outpatients or an A&E where it's like a bus station row of chairs, and they're really like hard back.
Do you know what I've actually supplied? I've supplied a lot of seating to doctors and hospital situations over the years, and it was interesting actually doing that. Part of doing that, just how little the process of what was needed had been talked through by some suppliers. That's again, I think that's where suppliers can make a massive difference. Are you actually walking the people that you're supplying to through the whole process and actually kind of coming up with the questions for them as well? I can remember going into sort of hospital areas and saying, you haven't got a mix in here in terms of sizing of seating, for example, right?
Yeah.
You've got nowhere for anyone that's smaller to sit. You've got nowhere for children to sit. Equally, you've got no bariatric seating. There's not a single chair in here which somebody of a certain weight would be able to sit on without breaking it.
And
right?
Rachel made a really interesting point, Graham, before, where she was saying about people of similar height sharing chairs. And I don't know whether it crossed your mind, but and I think Andrew Shepherd, who's been on before from Flock, has spoken about this, is about just because people are the same height, the potential difference in leg length and therefore suitability of the chair changes, doesn't it? So again, it's that even having people of the same height doesn't mean that the chair is going to work for them and be any more or less comfortable, because there's so many different factors that need to be considered just for seating that maybe aren't necessarily considered, or people are aware that you can't just go 5'6" this chair, 5'9" that chair.
I used to get asked it all the time. People would say that people, even within occupational health, would actually say to me, how tall are they? And I'd go, well, that's irrelevant, isn't it? Because, you need to know, getting technical, you need to know what their mid-popliteal length is and their lower popliteal length. If you don't know sort of from behind the buttock to behind the knee and from behind the knee to the floor what length they are, you don't know whether or not they're going to be sat at the right height, because you could have a very long body, but you could have quite short upper leg, and that completely changes the way you sit. So the chair, elements of the chair have to be adjustable, have to be different types of sizing in order to accommodate different people with different sort of size limbs. And it's a really tricky, it's
a minefield, isn't it?
It is a minefield.
Ideally you'd have a chair for each person.
Everybody.
So I had to do a funding case, for example. So we did get chairs, individual chairs for everyone who had an office. But again, people steal your chair, or you get a load of coats on it that gets taken somewhere else and it gets lost. But originally did a funding case, so anyone at office space had their own chair, which was, tailored to them. And then for the workstations, we had to do the best we could to get a variety of, some people have higher chairs, some people having the lower chairs, and making sure they were adjustable. And again, making sure in the dispensary, for example, that they were wipe cleanable, because you've got people coming in and out from the wards with infections and bugs on them. You need to be able to keep cleaning those chairs. So they have to have the leather type chairs. They're called I don't know if you have a Bamback saddle chair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like those ones where you could get them back. And again, some people like the backless chairs where they could just hop on the seat bit and slide up to the computer and type away. And then other people wanted a backrest. So, it wasn't as simple as like, oh, here's somebody, order 80 chairs.
Yeah,
it was really assessing like what met the needs. And like you said, you couldn't possibly meet the needs of every member of staff. So like 80 staff to try and get the right chair for every person is, and then by the time you've got the funding and the money's come through, some of those people are left and you've got somebody else coming. So
I love it. This is a very real conversation. Just a little aside there. It reminded me of something which is, and this, I don't know whether you've ever heard this, Stephen, but coats on the backs of chairs. Any ergonomics companies out there that are listening to this will know this, and will be laughing or crying as I tell you this. But one of the things that a lot of people in organisations always liked to do was to put their coat on the back of their chair. partly because, I mean, it's a place to put it. Secondly, because it would identify that that's your chair, and then when you got off of it, everybody else would know it's your chair. However, the majority of modern operator chairs, the adjustment in the back of the chair in terms of back height is done on a ratchet system. Yeah. The problem with putting your coat or even your jacket on the back of a chair is that the amount of calls that I've been to over the years where someone said the back of my chair's broken, right? It keeps slipping, and the reason being is as you sit on the chair with your coat on the back, the ratchet, the way it works is that it kind of ratchets up on notches, and then when it gets to the top, it slips off of the ratchet and goes back down, so you can then readjust it. But when you sit with a coat on the back, you keep pulling on that ratchet.
Yeah.
What happens is with time, you move the back of the chair up, and then it drops down because you're actually activating the ratchet, and it means that people think that the back's broken. And the amount of times
common thing we had, the manufacturers would either send us a new bit or someone would come in and service all our chairs once a year, and like I said, mostly
service all your chairs. And actually they probably didn't need to, because probably what it was is that people are sitting with coats or jackets on the back, and actually if you tell them to take them off and put them somewhere else, you'll find that the ratchet stay in place.
But you say that as well, so like part of saving costs was like removing tea rooms and removing cloakrooms, so you would be shoving your bag under your desk and your coat on the back of your chair, because the locker rooms no longer existed, because a locker room would be turned into, I don't know, like in pharmacy, a room for manufacturing, or on a ward, so even like nurses used to have every ward used to have a patient's day room where they could all go watch telly, etc. And then you'd have a nurse's staff room, so they could just go and have the lunch somewhere quiet for 5 minutes if they were lucky, and be uninterrupted. But as more and more bed space was required, you had to look at the estate of your hospital and go, right, if we take this, we need to change this room into a clinic room or a treatment room, or an extra bathroom, for example. So you lost that space. So those things, well, it's like fine to say it's not very good for your chair. And imagine, you've walked in. So again, most hospitals haven't got on-site parking for staff anymore, because parking is such a big issue that you need to make the parking available for patients. So a lot of hospitals outsource and get a parking off-site. So if it's raining and you've walked to work in the rain and you've got a wet coat, it's going to go straight on the back of your chair. That's the reality of. And also then you might have on your chair a spare jumper or a spare cardigan or something to change into when you get to work, knowing that you're going to be wet. So you're probably slung that on your chair as well. I could probably say my chair used to have like 2 cardigans, a coat, and probably a spare set of scrubs hanging underneath it, because again, if I had staff off sick, then I would go to the wards, and generally if I was going to, like, if I was doing management duties, I could wear what I wanted, but just out of one, so you're identifiable, to go onto the wards and just put a set of scrubs on. And also for infection control, it's better for patients that they just know you're from pharmacy, or they know you're a nurse, for example. And then also you can take that off when you get back in, and you can sling it in the high temperature wash. Even things like that, like there is literally so much that you don't. I
think this has been an absolutely brilliant conversation today, and I tell you what it highlights as well. It highlights actually something that I was talking to an ergonomist that actually gets involved in that during the week, Stephen, which is that it highlights even more the reason why human factors, ergonomists, experts need to get involved in design of offices, and processes, as much as anything else, as well as the education piece, as well as the provision piece, because all of this stuff that Rachel's talking about now, this space is now being used for this space because of this, etc. If the right people were involved in those conversations in the first place, who actually understand people and how people need to work, rather than let's make this space look pretty. Oh, I'll tell you what, why don't we have one of those things over there? Then actually you'd get the solution right from the start. Yeah, because this stuff is complex. It really is complex.
But look how Rachel's led this conversation with talking about the chairs and the rate and all that sort of thing, the car parking. They're all sort of, one thing leads to another that leads to another that has an impact on someone's health and well-being, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you wouldn't think when I started off my career in pharmacy, got into like that when I was a senior leader, I'd be doing projects on chairs. Or do you know what I mean? Like you wouldn't have thought, that's what
fair
a
enough,
pharmacy leader does. She's doing a project to make sure all her stuff's got the right chairs or they've got the right uniforms, for example. Even everything that you purchase, you've got to justify the price. You've got to justify the need. So like, other medical equipment. So in pharmacy, for example, all the measures, although we don't make a lot of stuff, but having measuring cylinders that can be washed at high temperatures and having triangles to count drugs on, again, not so much now because you've got robots and a lot of stuff it comes in packs already made up, but there are still things that you have to count out, and that's never going to go away. Having, do you have, like in surgery, like disposable scalpels, or do you have things that could go through an autoclave? When I started, there was a whole autoclave room, so all the bottles would go through, cleaned at a really high temperature and reused. But there's also a whole, you were talking about estates and purchasing, etc. There's also this whole other side in hospitals where they sell off all of the old scraps. So like if you have your pipes replaced, that the people in the estates, they will be making sure that they're complying with environmental guidelines and sort of can we reuse things? Can we sell things for scrap? Can we get money and bring it back in that way? So as well as getting rid of all your medical waste, you've got all the buildings waste. If you knock down a wall, where's all that stuff going to go? Who's going to pick it up? Who's going to take it away? So it's literally, it's like you said, you need people delivering the healthcare, like healthcare specialists, but you also need people that have the expertise to run a business. But those people need to have empathy. If they haven't got any empathy, then you're screwed as a person trying to run a department, because they don't understand that it's not just about money. For us, patients have always got to come first in their care. So it's not as black and white as cutting here and doing this. It's got to be about the cost to human life as well as the cost to the bank account. But I do agree, you do need that expertise, people who know how to deal with money. And traditionally, those people, directors on boards, hospital boards, would be doctors, surgeons, people who got to the top of the chain and then they went onto the board. So I think you need a mix. You need like clinical people, and then you need some people who've got business acumen, who know how to deal with all the different things. But the NHS is evolving all the time. That, how does anyone keep up with the level of expertise to negotiate at that level and you're talking billions of pounds, aren't you? You're talking like
we are.
Little bits of money.
I think we could go on and on this subject, but we've run out of time. So thank you, Rachel, for coming in today.
That's okay. I haven't done one talking about chairs and things before.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Folks, if you've been listening today, it's food for thought. There's a lot that there to unpack, but I'd certainly love to hear your thoughts and comments. Of course, you can catch up on previous episodes of this as well at wellbeing.com. Until same time next week, thanks for listening, and bye for now.